A scruffy janitor in a faded uniform walked into the most exclusive bank in Manhattan just to check his balance. The billionaire CEO in line behind him scoffed, expecting pennies. But when the teller gasped and turned the screen around, the CEO's smug smile vanished. He wasn't just wealthy, he owned her company's debt. The alarm clock buzzed at 4 a.m., a harsh, mechanical sound that cut through the freezing stillness of the cramped Brooklyn apartment. Dylan Edward didn't groan. He didn't hit snooze. He simply reached out a calloused hand, silenced the noise, and sat up in the dark. At 38, Dylan looked 10 years older. His face was lined with the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, and his eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, carried the heavy weight of a man who had seen the bottom of the world. He dressed quietly, slipping into his faded blue work trousers and the grey button-down shirt that bore the embroidered logo of Apex Facility Services. Before leaving, he nudged open the door to the tiny second bedroom. In the pale light of the street lamp filtering through the blinds, he watched his 7-year-old daughter, Fiona, sleeping. Her small chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, but the faint wheeze in her breath was a constant, terrifying reminder of why he was awake before the sun. Fiona had a rare pulmonary condition. The medical bills over the last 3 years had been staggering. The insurance companies had fought him at every turn, denying claims, delaying treatments, and drowning him in paperwork. But Dylan never complained. He just worked. He scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, and wiped down the glass doors of the skyscrapers where the city's elite made fortunes they couldn't possibly spend in a lifetime. 5 years ago, Dylan's life had been completely different. But when his wife, Sarah, lost her battle with ovarian cancer, something inside Dylan broke. He realized that the relentless pursuit of his past life had cost him the only thing that mattered: time. He had walked away from everything, burying his former identity so deep that no one in his current world could ever find it. He wanted a quiet, invisible life. He wanted to be nothing more than Fiona's father. But invisibility didn't pay for experimental pulmonary treatments. Fiona needed a specialized surgery, one that wasn't covered by his meager insurance, and the hospital demanded a $150,000 deposit by the end of the week. It was time to open the vault. By 11:30 a.m., Dylan had finished his morning shift at the Orion Premier Bank building on Wall Street. He had buffed the Italian marble floors until they looked like glass and polished the brass railings of the grand staircase. He smelled faintly of industrial pine cleaner and sweat. Instead of heading to the break room for his usual sandwich, Dylan unclipped his heavy ring of keys, placed his mop bucket in the utility closet, and walked out into the main lobby. Orion Premier Bank was not a place for the working class. It was an institution built for old money and new tech billionaires. The air inside smelled of expensive leather, polished mahogany, and the subtle, intoxicating scent of raw power. Tellers didn't stand behind bulletproof glass. They sat at antique oak desks, offering espresso and sparkling water to clients whose net worth required commas upon commas. Dylan joined the queue for the standard service desks. Even here, the line was filled with men in tailored Brioni suits and women carrying Birkin bags. Dylan, in his scuffed work boots and uniform, stuck out like a cracked window in a cathedral. People instinctively gave him a wide berth, their eyes sliding right past him, as if he were a piece of furniture. He was used to it. The wealthy had a unique talent for unseeing the people who cleaned up after them. Right as Dylan neared the front of the line, the heavy glass doors of the bank swung open, and Victoria Kensington walked in. Victoria was the CEO of Kensington Global, a sprawling private equity firm known for its ruthless acquisitions and merciless restructuring. At 42, she was striking, intimidating, and entirely uncompromising. She wore a sharp, cream-colored Chanel suit, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe chignon. Trailing half a step behind her was a frantic assistant, juggling a tablet and 2 phones. "I don't care what the board thinks, David," Victoria snapped, not even looking at her assistant. "Strip the assets, liquidate the pensions, and fire the executive team. I want the merger finalized by Friday. If they push back, bleed them in litigation until they beg us to buy them." "Yes, Miss Kensington," David stammered, "but regarding the bridge loan for the acquisition, Orion Bank is stalling on the credit line." Victoria stopped dead in her tracks, her stilettos clicking sharply on the marble. "Stalling? I manage a $10 billion fund. They do not stall me." "Where is Robert Hayes?" "The branch manager is currently in a meeting, ma'am. We were told to wait for the VIP teller." Victoria's eyes darted toward the VIP section, seeing it temporarily unstaffed. A visible sneer formed on her lips. "I am not waiting. I have a lunch meeting with the mayor in 20 minutes. She marched directly toward the standard teller line, bypassing the velvet ropes. She saw Dylan standing at the front, next to be called, and let out a dramatic, exasperated sigh. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension. She stepped right up to Dylan's shoulder. "Are you lost? The service entrance is in the alley." Dylan turned his head slowly. He looked at Victoria with the calm, deadpan expression of a man who had seen far worse things in life than an arrogant billionaire. "I have an account here, ma'am," Dylan said politely, his voice low and steady. "I just need to check my balance." Victoria let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed in the quiet lobby. Several heads turned. "Check your balance? What, did you lose a $20 bill in the sofa cushions? Use an ATM. Some of us have actual capital to manage, and my time is worth $1,000 a minute." Dylan didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned his attention back to the front desk as the light blinked green. "My turn," he murmured, stepping forward. Victoria seethed, her face flushing with indignation. She followed right behind him, invading his personal space, intent on rushing him away. "Make it quick," she snapped at the young teller, sitting behind the mahogany desk. "He just needs to know if he has enough for a hot dog." The teller, a young man named Jonathan Reed, looked incredibly uncomfortable. His eyes darted nervously between the terrifying famous CEO hovering at the desk and the quiet janitor standing patiently in front of him. Jonathan smoothed his tie, trying to maintain the bank's strict standard of absolute professionalism. "Good afternoon, sir," Jonathan said to Dylan, though his tone carried a hint of rushed annoyance, eager to appease the billionaire behind him. "How can I help you today?" "I need a balance inquiry, and I need to arrange a wire transfer," Dylan said, reaching into his pocket. He didn't pull out a sleek, metal black card or a platinum credit card. Instead, he placed a faded, slightly bent, standard blue debit card on the desk. Victoria rolled her eyes so hard it was a wonder she didn't strain a muscle. "A wire transfer? To where?" "The electric company. Just give him his receipt so I can get to business that actually keeps this city running." Dylan ignored her. He looked at Jonathan. "It's an older account. I haven't accessed it in a few years." Jonathan sighed silently, taking the battered card. "Of course, sir. Please enter your PIN on the keypad." Dylan reached out and punched in a 4-digit code. It was Sarah's birthday. Jonathan swiped the card through the heavy, brass-trimmed reader on his desk. He turned to his dual monitors, ready to quickly print a slip showing a few $100 and send the janitor on his way. He typed in his own teller credentials to pull up the inquiry. He hit Enter. The screen froze. Jonathan frowned and clicked his mouse a few times. The system, usually lightning fast, was hanging on a loading icon. Suddenly, the screen flashed solid red. A massive, bold warning box appeared in the center of the monitor. Restricted access. Black tier protocol. Branch manager. Override required. Jonathan blinked. He had worked at Orion Premier for 2 years, handling accounts for millionaires every single day. He had never seen a black tier protocol warning. It was an urban legend among the tellers, a security measure supposedly reserved for sovereign wealth funds, foreign royalty, and individuals whose net worth could rival small countries. "Is there a problem?" Dylan asked mildly. "Are you kidding me?" Victoria snapped, leaning over the desk. "He probably hasn't paid his account maintenance fees, and you're freezing up the system. Just throw him out. I need to speak to Robert Hayes right now about a $300 million credit line, and you are wasting my time with the help." Jonathan was pale. He ignored Victoria entirely, his eyes glued to the screen. "Sir," Jonathan whispered, his voice trembling slightly. I can't access this account. The system has locked me out." "I know," Dylan said calmly. "You need to call Robert." Victoria let out a bark of incredulous laughter. "You think you know the branch manager? Robert Hayes doesn't deal with the cleaning staff. He deals with people who own the buildings you mop." "Mr. Hayes?" Jonathan stammered into his headset, his hand shaking as he pressed the direct line to the manager's office. "Mr. Hayes, I need you down at desk 4 immediately. It's a black tier override." There was a pause on the headset. Then Jonathan heard the sound of a chair violently scraping against a floor, followed by hurried footsteps. Less than 30 seconds later, Robert Hayes, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and a bespoke charcoal suit, practically sprinted out of the mahogany-paneled elevators. He was breathless, his usually composed face flushed with panic. "Where?" Robert demanded as he reached the desk. Victoria immediately stepped in front of Dylan, flashing her most demanding corporate smile. "Robert, finally. Your staff is incredibly inept today. I've been waiting for 10 minutes while this janitor tries to figure out his overdraft fees. Now, about Kensington Global's credit." Robert Hayes didn't even look at her. He physically brushed past the billionaire CEO, a move that left Victoria completely speechless, and stared at the computer monitor. Then he slowly turned his head to look at the man in the faded work uniform. Robert's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. He quickly grabbed his own master keycard, swiped it through Jonathan's terminal, and typed in a complex alphanumeric password. The red warning screen vanished, replaced by a dashboard that only branch managers were authorized to view. Robert looked at the name on the screen. Dylan Edward. He looked at the entity linked to the account. Edward Capital Holdings. He looked at the balance. The blood drained from Robert's face. He looked back up at Dylan, his hands visibly shaking. Mr. Edward," Robert choked out, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "My God, we thought you were dead. You haven't made a transaction in 5 years." "I've been busy," Dylan said softly. "Are my funds still liquid?" "Liquid?" Robert sounded like he was hyperventilating. "Sir, your trust has been aggressively compounding in the highest yield blind funds on the market. Sir, you are our largest individual depositor, by a massive margin." Victoria Kensington, who was not used to being ignored, had finally recovered from the shock of being brushed aside. She stepped forward, her face twisted in fury. "Robert, what kind of joke is this? Are you seriously prioritizing a janitor over Kensington Global? Do you know how much money my firm brings to this bank?" Robert finally turned to Victoria. The subservient, eager-to-please smile he usually reserved for her was completely gone. In its place was a look of cold, hard reality. Miss Kensington, Robert said firmly, I need to ask you to step back. Excuse me, Victoria shrieked. I demand to see his screen. You are treating this mop pusher like he's Warren Buffett. He's probably got $300 to his name. Before Robert could stop her, Victoria aggressively leaned over Jonathan's desk and stared at the manager's monitor. Her eyes darted to the bold numbers at the top right of the dashboard. She read the number once. She blinked, her brain aggressively rejecting the visual information. She read it again. Available cash balance, $2,481,593,201.45. Victoria's breath hitched. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. $2.4 billion in pure liquid cash. Not stock options, not restricted equity. Cash. But that wasn't what made her stomach drop into an abyss of ice. Directly below the balance was a list of the account's major asset holdings, and right at the top of the list, marked with a red asterisk denoting majority ownership, was a collateralized debt obligation. Dylan Edwards Trust was the primary financier of the exact credit line that was keeping Kensington Global afloat. Victoria slowly turned her head to look at Dylan, the scruffy janitor holding the mop bucket, the man she had just insulted and tried to throw out of the bank. Dylan looked back at her, his piercing blue eyes holding no anger, only a terrifying, quiet authority. You were saying something about my hot dog fund, Miss Kensington? Dylan asked, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the bank. The silence in the grand lobby of Orion Premier Bank was absolute. The murmurs of the elite clientele had died away, replaced by a collective, breathless tension. Tellers stopped typing. Security guards discreetly shifted closer. Victoria Kensington stared at Dylan Edward, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the mahogany desk so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. The condescending sneer had melted off her face, leaving behind a pallid mask of shock. She looked at his faded grey shirt, the frayed collar, the calloused hands resting loosely by his sides. None of it made sense. The math in her head was violently colliding with the reality in front of her. This is a mistake, Victoria said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its sharp, commanding edge. She turned frantically to the branch manager. Robert, this is a glitch in your mainframe, a catastrophic error. This man cleans the toilets on the 42nd floor. He does not own Edward Capital. Robert Hayes was sweating right through his bespoke charcoal suit. He didn't look at Victoria. His eyes were locked on Dylan, filled with the kind of reverence usually reserved for deities or executioners. Miss Kensington. Robert swallowed hard, his throat dry. Edward Capital Holdings is an apex entity. It operates through blind trusts and shell corporations to mask the primary beneficiary. But the biometric signature and the master cipher, they are flawless. There is no mistake. Mr. Edward is the sole signatory. Dylan finally broke his gaze away from Victoria and looked at the terrified young teller, Jonathan. The wire transfer, Jonathan, to Wellington Memorial Hospital. Account routing number is on the back of my card. Yes, sir. Right away, Mr. Edward, Jonathan stammered, his fingers flying across the keyboard with terrified speed. Victoria wasn't done. The survival instincts that had made her a billionaire predator kicked in. She squared her shoulders, attempting to project dominance. Fine. Let's pretend for a second that this absurd theatrical display is real. You hold the debt on the Kensington-Sterling merger. So what? It's a standard bridge loan. We pay the interest. We are in compliance. You can't touch us, and you certainly don't dictate my schedule. Dylan turned to her slowly. The mild-mannered janitor was gone. In his place stood the ghost of a ruthless titan who had once built an empire before grief drove him into the shadows. You aren't in compliance, Victoria, Dylan said quietly. Check Section 4, Paragraph 9 of the covenants you signed last Thursday. Victoria froze. Her assistant, David, who was standing a few feet away, suddenly turned the color of wet ash. He frantically began tapping on his tablet, pulling up the contract documents. "What are you talking about?" Victoria demanded, though a tremor betrayed her confidence. "It's a standard debt vehicle." "It was a standard debt vehicle," Dylan corrected, his voice a low, lethal hum. "Until your firm became over-leveraged on the Sterling acquisition. You collateralized your primary operating accounts to secure the final $300 million. But there's a material adverse change clause. If Kensington Global's debt-to-equity ratio shifts by more than 4%, the lender, which is me, has the right to call the loan, immediately, in full." "David!" Victoria snapped, not taking her eyes off Dylan. "Tell me he's lying." David looked up from his tablet, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "Ms. Kensington, the clause is there. And the market dropped this morning. Our equity positions took a hit in the European session. Our ratio shifted by 4.2%. Victoria felt the floor tilt beneath her stilettos. No, that's impossible. Even if you call the loan, we have a 30-day cure period." "You did," Dylan said. "Before I bought the debt package from your previous underwriters at a premium, specifically to strip that grace period from the fine print, you signed the revisions without reading them because you were in a rush to make your lunch meetings." Dylan took a step toward her. Despite being a head shorter than her bodyguard, his presence expanded, filling the room, suffocating her. "You want to know why I did it, Victoria?" Dylan asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she, Robert, and David could hear. 3 weeks ago, Kensington Global initiated a hostile takeover of Wellington Memorial Hospital. You plan to gut their pediatric research wing, lay off the surgical staff, and sell the real estate to luxury developers to turn a quick profit. Victoria blinked, completely blindsided. It's just an asset play. The hospital is hemorrhaging money. It's business." "My 7-year-old daughter is in that hospital," Dylan said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "She needs the experimental treatments your asset play was about to defund. I walked away from this world 5 years ago to be a father. I wanted to be left alone. I wanted peace." He leaned in, his blue eyes boring into her soul. "But you came after my daughter's life to pad your quarterly earnings. So I woke up, I made a few phone calls, and I bought your debt." Victoria Kensington, the terror of Wall Street, the woman who fired executives over cold coffee, was trembling. She looked around the bank. The wealthy clients were watching in stunned silence. Her assistant was backing away from her. Robert Hayes was actively avoiding her gaze, treating her like a toxic asset. For the first time in her life, Victoria realized she was not the apex predator. She had walked into the jaws of a leviathan. "Dylan," she started, her voice cracking. The haughty arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by naked, desperate panic. "Mr. Edward, please, if you call that loan today, Kensington Global won't survive the week. We'll face margin calls we can't meet. We'll be liquidated. I'll lose everything." "I know," Dylan said. His face was entirely devoid of sympathy. "You'll know exactly how the families at Wellington Memorial felt when you sent them those eviction notices." "I'll stop the acquisition," Victoria pleaded, her hands coming up in a placating gesture. "I'll kill the deal right now. I'll call the board. Wellington Memorial is safe. Just don't call the debt. Give me 24 hours to restructure." Dylan stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He thought about his past life, the ruthless corporate raiding that had consumed his time while his wife, Sarah, was dying. He had promised himself he would never be that man again. But some monsters only understood the language of teeth and claws. "You will kill the hospital acquisition," Dillon commanded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Furthermore, Kensington Global will immediately establish a $50 million irrevocable endowment for the Wellington Pediatric Pulmonary Wing. You will sign the papers before you leave this building." "$50 million?" Victoria gasped. "Dillon, that's a massive hit to our liquidity." $60 million, Dillon said, without missing a beat. Victoria snapped her mouth shut. She nodded quickly, swallowing her pride, her ego, and her fortune. "Yes, $60 million. Done." "And one more thing," Dillon added, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He handed it to her. Victoria took it with shaking hands. It was a drafted letter of resignation. "You step down as CEO of Kensington Global, effective at close of business today," Dillon said. "You retain your shares, but you give up your board seat and all voting rights. If I see your name in the financial papers anywhere near a corporate acquisition ever again, I will personally dismantle your life until you are mopping the floors of the buildings you used to own. Do we understand each other?" Tears of pure humiliation welled in Victoria's eyes. She had spent 2 decades building her reputation, crushing her rivals, clawing her way to the absolute pinnacle of Manhattan's elite, and it was all being torn down in 10 minutes by a man wearing a name tag that said Apex Facility Services. But she had no choice. She was entirely checkmated. "I understand," Victoria whispered, her voice broken. "Good," Dillon said. He turned his back on her, dismissing her from his reality entirely. He looked back at the terrified teller. "Jonathan, are we finished?" Yes, sir," Jonathan practically shouted, jumping in his seat. The printer whirred to life. Jonathan grabbed the slip of paper with trembling fingers and handed it across the mahogany desk. "The $150,000 deposit has been successfully wired to Wellington Memorial Hospital, sir. Your remaining balance is secure." Dillon took the receipt. He folded it neatly and placed it into his chest pocket, right over his heart. "Thank you, Jonathan. You were very helpful today," Dillon said politely. He turned to Robert Hayes, who was still standing rigidly at attention. "Robert, ensure Ms. Kensington's paperwork is drafted and filed within the hour. If there are any delays, call my private line." "With absolute pleasure, Mr. Edward," Robert said, bowing his head slightly. Dillon didn't look at Victoria again. He simply adjusted the collar of his faded work shirt and walked out of the VIP section. The crowd of millionaires instinctively parted for him, creating a wide path as he walked through the heavy glass doors and out into the crisp New York air. He didn't care about the billions in the bank. He didn't care about ruining Victoria Kensington. He only cared about one thing. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his cheap, prepaid cell phone, and dialed a number. "Hello?" A nurse's voice answered. "Hi, this is Dillon Edward, Fiona's dad," Dillon said, a genuine warm smile finally breaking across his weathered face. "The funds just cleared. You can prep her for the surgery." Did Dillon go too far by forcing Victoria to resign? Or did the arrogant billionaire get exactly the brutal reality check she deserved? When the elite play with people's lives, sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one holding all the cards. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of ultimate karma, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more incredible real-life dramas